I'm the director of research at the Windbridge Research Center, a nonprofit organization where our mission is to alleviate suffering around dying, death, and what comes next by performing scientific research and producing free educational materials. Our research is grant funded and peer reviewed. I'm a classically trained research scientist, and for roughly 20 years, I've been studying mediums. A medium is an individual who experiences communication from the deceased and who regularly, reliably, and on demand reports the specific resulting messages to living friends and loved ones called sitters during a process called a reading. At the Windbridge Research Center, we work with a team of 18 mediums. We originally had 20 and 2 have since retired. These mediums were screened, tested, and trained during an 8-step peer-reviewed process that takes roughly a year to complete. They are scientifically minded and volunteer their time participating in research. The time required for the testing and certification procedure was covered by a grant, and we're no longer screening new mediums. Today, I'll be talking about the laboratory evidence from mediumship research that demonstrates that the mind is so much more than just the brain. Because our time is limited and these are complex topics, I'll just be providing you with little bites and tastes of the content so you can get the general flavor. I'll also be pointing to further free resources, so you'll be able to gorge yourself at a later time if you want to do that. This is disconcerting. I can't hear you all. I hope that you're laughing at my jokes.
I
am. There are many ways of knowing, including inference using logic to draw conclusions, and experience or observation, which can be tremendously evidential for individuals, but cannot be generalized to others or to society. Using the scientific method to acquire generalizable knowledge is widely considered the most valid and reliable method. Science combines the methods of inference and experience to collect verifiable evidence. So I use science to add to the body of evidence that we're hearing about at this conference regarding the mind-brain relationship. The evidence from mediumship research demonstrating that mind is greater than brain comes from 2 directions. First, mediums can report accurate information they could not have acquired using the physical sensory methods of the brain. Second, they experience receiving that information as communication from a consciousness that has survived the permanent death of the brain. Let's unpack those. And don't worry about these details. I'll cover the important pieces in a moment and also point you to the buffet for further sustenance. The basics are that our accuracy testing protocol, as well as the accuracy scoring data we collect and analyze, are complex. We could talk about these alone for 3 days. So we'll just get the general flavor here. If you're interested, there are several free resources available that you can munch on later. I'll bring these feast slides back up at the end. To test medium's accuracy, we use a fully masked or blinded protocol. The terms masked or blinded refer to the inclusion of practices that prevent different participants from having access to different types of information. It doesn't, as some sloppy, irresponsible, incompetent so-called journalists have written, mean that anyone wears a blindfold. We prevent the medium from knowing about the sitter, so the medium is blinded or masked. Our protocol addresses the normal explanations for the source of medium's accurate readings, including fraud, cueing by the experimenter, rater bias, and cold reading, including statements so general they could apply to nearly anyone. Let's dig deeper into the protocol. The Windbridge protocol uses 5 levels of blinding or masking, so we often refer to it as quintuple blind. The readings take place over the phone between a blinded experimenter and a blinded medium. I could use the term masked medium, but that sounds like a superhero. Each medium reads for 2 deceased people of the same gender, and the readings are audio recorded. The 2 associated absent sitters do not hear the readings as they take place. There are 2 other blinded experimenters interacting with the participant at other steps in the protocol. So the medium, the sitter, and 3 experimenters are the 5 levels of blinding. The readings are transcribed and formatted into numbered lists of items by a blinded experimenter, me, who doesn't have information about the deceased targets or the absent sitters. The 2 readings are sent to each of the 2 absent sitters who are blinded to which was intended for their deceased loved one. Without knowing which is which, each sitter scores the readings intended for them, called a target, and a reading intended for the other sitter, which serves as a decoy, again, not knowing which is which. The sitters then score each reading for how well it reflects their own loved one. Different studies collected different scoring data, but this data may include item scores, whole reading, or global scores, and choosing which reading of the two is generally more applicable. So why do we do it this way? Why these 5 levels of blinding? Well, it's to address the alternative explanations for the accuracy of a medium statement. For example, because the medium has no knowledge or access to the sitter prior to the reading, this protocol addresses fraud because the medium can't look up anything beforehand and do what's called hot reading, which is using the information they looked up to create a seemingly accurate reading. Because the experimenter serving as a proxy for the absent sitter is blinded to information about the sitter and their deceased loved one, they cannot cue the medium inadvertently or intentionally. By having each sitter score 2 readings, this addresses what's called rater bias. Some people have a tendency to score most of the items in a mediumship reading as accurate, and some people score few items this way. In addition, if someone knows a reading was intended for them, they might find more items relevant. When we analyze the data, we compare the scores sitters gave their own target readings to scores they gave other sitters' decoy readings. This equalizes rater bias across the study, rendering it irrelevant as an explanation. Because the medium has no access to the sitter during the reading, the protocol addresses what's called cold reading, which involves a fraudulent medium using the sitter's own statements or using sensory clues or cues to steer the direction of the reading and fabricate what seems like an accurate reading. Statements so general they could apply to nearly anyone is also a form of cold reading addressed by our protocol. During the reading, the medium is asked 5 specific questions about the deceased person. And this is where the biggest criticism of the protocol comes in. I'll explain. We need each reading in a study to involve only one deceased person. In order to help the medium focus on that person, ensure they're connecting with the right person, and as a kind of permission from the absent sitter to connect with their loved one, we give the medium the first name of the target deceased person at the start of the reading. The criticism is that the mediums have memorized actuarial tables about the popularity of first names, and when I give them the first name at the start of the reading, they call to mind, or nowadays they could look it up online, I guess, the probable age of people with that name and make educated guesses about those people in order to fabricate an accurate reading. Nowadays, I said it. I did write it in here. Nowadays, these fictional fraudulent mediums could look this up on their cell phones, I guess. There's no evidence that any of the mediums on my team have ever done anything like this or that it is even possible. That does not stop the naysayers from continuing to posit it as a logical possibility, but let's test out its plausibility right now. Let's use the first name George, which has steadily declined in popularity in the US since 1880. So there's no real way to determine a probability for how old someone named George is. At the start of a scheduled reading, I would give the medium the name George and then ask them to answer these questions. What did George look like in his physical life? Describe George's personality. What were George's interests or activities? How did George die? And what specific messages does George have for the absent sitter? But all people named George are exactly the same, right? And we can easily answer these questions about any George, just like these deniers say, right? It's someone like this, right? Or wait, someone like this. Maybe like this. Or this. Or this. Or this. I hope you're laughing. I mean, maybe you'd have a 50-50 shot if you said something about a microphone for the interests or activities question. But other than that, these men are all over the map regarding just physical and personality descriptions. But to also provide specific messages to their loved one, I just don't see it. What about a different name? Let's look at a couple people named John who were born around the same time. They should be similar enough for us to answer all 5 of those questions about them, right? Not so much. The Beatles, John Lennon, did not have much in common with Republican Senator John McCain, even though they were born within a few years of each other. So although this criticism gets thrown at us a lot, we don't think the names provide enough information to answer the questions accurately. And because it is possible for anyone to have mediumistic experiences, it's not really possible to test this baseless theory using alleged non-medium control participants. So let's move on. The data we collected from 58 quintuple blind readings by 20 pre-screened mediums demonstrated statistically significant evidence that certain mediums can report accurate and specific information about the deceased. For example, the average item percent accuracy scores given to target readings was significantly higher than the average of scores given to decoy readings. That is, blinded sitter scored readings performed by blinded mediums interacting with a blinded experimenter for their own deceased loved one, called targets, as more accurate than readings for other sitters' loved ones, called decoys. Similarly, when asked to make what's called forced choice, blinded sitters were able to choose their own target reading statistically more often than they chose decoy readings. We could expect 50% of sitters to choose their own reading by chance alone, but in these 58 mediumship readings, 66% did. These types of accuracy scoring data demonstrate a process we call anomalous information reception, or AIR. These pre-screened mediums can report accurate and specific information about the deceased without prior knowledge, with no feedback during or after the reading, and without using fraud or deception. If these mediums were only using their 5 physical senses and minds trapped inside skulls, that would be impossible. So this data collected under controlled laboratory conditions demonstrates that the mind can function beyond just the jobs a brain can do. The competing philosophical explanations for the source of the information mediums report is complex. So again, we'll just take a taste. Either the mediums are psychically acquiring information about the deceased, or they are communicating with the deceased. We think of it as retrieve, which just requires one person, the medium, or receive, which requires 2 people, the deceased sender and the medium receiver. The content of a mediumship reading can never break this tie. Is it retrieve or is it receive? Whatever mediums say, it can logically be information actively retrieved or passively received. For example, if a medium reports something somewhere knows, that can be explained as the medium psychically reading that person. If a medium describes an event that hasn't happened yet, that can be explained as psychically reading the future. Either of those cases can also be explained by communication with the deceased. So to get past the stalemate, we use what's called phenomenology, which is the study of experiences as they are experienced by the experiencer. We performed several qualitative and quantitative peer-reviewed studies with nearly 130 mediums and found that receiving communication from the deceased feels different than retrieving information psychically. This is true even under randomized, counterbalanced, and blinded conditions with pre-screened participants. We have a paper coming out in IAND's Journal of Near-Death Studies that details our most recent findings. Overall, this line of research demonstrates that it's not black and white. They are not always doing one or the other. There is much complex gray area. There are many similarities between the experiences of retrieving psychic information and receiving communication from the deceased. They are, after all, both psychic abilities that transcend the brain. There are, however, many differences between the two. For example, when describing the 2 types of experiences, one Windbridge medium noted, a psychic reading is like reading a book, a mediumship reading is like seeing a play. Other descriptions from Windbridge pre-screened mediums were, in a mediumship reading, it feels like someone is talking to me. The psychic readings, it's information about someone. And with mediumship, I get to meet new people all the time. Psychic information is boring. These comments reflect what we found when we surveyed an additional 122 mediums about their experiences. For example, don't worry about these numbers, just get the flavor. When we analyzed their descriptions of mediumistic in purple on the left and psychic in green on the right, experiences using text analysis software, we found that descriptions of mediumistic experiences contain more words in red, describing interpersonal relationships, the multiple sensory modes involved in the experience, food and cooking, the past, and spirituality than did descriptions of psychic reading experiences. Conversely, descriptions of mediumistic communication contain significantly fewer words in blue, describing a cognitive process that suggests that mediumship communication may be more intuitive than analytical when compared to psychic readings for the living. That these quantitative differences existed in the description supports the concept that communication with the deceased is experienced as different from acquiring psychic information about the living. We also used an instrument called the PCI that quantifies 26 different dimensions of consciousness and found that under blinded conditions, when compared to psychic readings, pre-screened mediums' experiences of receiving communication from the deceased involve statistically significantly higher levels of the feelings of love. This finding is not surprising, as the mediums are connecting loved ones with each other. In describing this aspect of love, one medium in our research shared this. In mediumship readings, there's more of a loving feeling. When I connect with somebody on the other side, everything's happy and great. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. I lose myself. I am part, I lost my place, sorry. My identity is gone. Who cares who I am? I'm just part of the universe. I'm part of love energy. It's like I'm connecting with that sacred love, that universal love on the other side, even though it's just in little tiny bits for a moment. Reading psychically is very different. I'm more aware of myself. It's more grounded. It makes me feel alone. If you'd like to learn more about our research examining mediums' experiences, several free resources are available. And again, I'll share these again at the end. The bottom line from the phenomenology research is that the best explanation for the source of a medium's information is that they are receiving communication from a consciousness that has survived permanent bodily death. This is an empirically supported conclusion, and until empirical research collected under controlled conditions demonstrates something different, this matter has been settled, no matter what philosophers in my field, talking about mediums from the 1800s, are saying. So the answers to the mind-brain question from evidential mediumship research are that based on the controlled laboratory accuracy testing, mind can function beyond the brain, and based on qualitative and quantitative phenomenology research, mind survives death and can communicate with the living. And this finding is in line with spontaneous cases of people experiencing continued connections with their loved ones after the death that Dr. Cooper and his colleagues collected, as well as the widespread phenomena from cultures all over the world for eons that our ancestors and loved ones are still with us and can communicate with us individually and with people like shamans serving that purpose specifically for the community. It just makes the most sense and is the conclusion best supported by the modern empirical data. A bonus finding is that love between people continues to function even past death and remains so palpable that mediums under blinded laboratory conditions can feel it. I think this is the most important piece. In our mission to alleviate suffering around dying, death, and what comes next, the Windbridge Research Center is primarily concerned with how these findings can be used to provide people grieving the death of a loved one or facing their own death the solace and comfort they need. We find this more relevant than taking time to defend against dogmatic fanatics claiming all mediums and all experiences are lying or delusional, or to argue with skeptical colleagues. I've got better things to do and think helping people is a more honorable life's purpose than arguing, though I do like to argue. In closing, I want to thank the Medium and Sitter research participants who volunteered in our research, the other researchers that collaborated with me, the Bial Foundation, which has funded the majority of our research studies, the wonderful people who continue to donate to the Windbridge Research Center to help support non-study-based projects like presenting at conferences like this, the IAN Symposium organizers, Jan and Darren, and all the behind-the-scenes people making everything possible. I'm so honored to be part of this symposium, bringing all these answers together in one place. I also want to thank my partner in science and in life, Mark Bacuzzi, for keeping our dogs occupied while I worked on and gave this presentation, and generally taking care of me for close to 17 years.